The crystal chandelier caught a different kind of light, a sharp, silver glint reflected in the obsidian eyes of a man moving through the crowd. Monica Dallaire noticed. Her husband, Kang Jun-suk, who had just spent the last 10 minutes treating her like a decorative ghost in front of the Russian brokers, didn't. She watched the hand reach into a tuxedo jacket, emerging with 4 inches of cold steel. 2 steps. That's all that separated them. 2 steps to decide if she would shield the man who had just publicly stripped her of her dignity, or let the blade find its home. Monica moved. Not with a scream, but with the fluid, silent grace of a woman who had spent years perfecting the art of being unnoticed. She stepped into the path of the silver flash, feeling the bite of the metal through her ivory silk. But here is what the gasping crowd didn't understand. Not Jun-suk, who caught her as she fell, not his mother, whose judgmental eyes finally widened in horror, not even the brother, Dae-min, who had paid for the kill. Monica didn't take the knife just to save him. She took it to break the silence. 6 years of being the perfect trophy. 6 years of her espresso-brown skin serving as a beautiful backdrop to his golden beige empire. Being ignored for that long does something to a woman's soul. It makes the sting of a blade feel more honest than the sting of his words. This is Monica, 29 years old, a woman of Haitian and Dominican fire cooled into a mask of Korean stoicism. For 6 years, she has navigated the treacherous waters of the Kang Syndicate, smoothing over his rough edges and bearing the weight of his mother's pale, porcelain expectations. She is so efficient at being his anchor that Jun-suk forgot she was a human being who could bleed. Tonight, at this gala, that neglect is about to be stained red. Welcome back, my fierce hearts and midnight dreamers. Before we slip into this story, take a second to subscribe, tap that like button, and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far our dark romance family reaches, across cities, countries, and time zones. Every click, every comment, every bit of love you leave here fuels these dangerous love stories and high-stakes betrayals we unravel together. So find your quiet place, and let the world fade away. Let's begin. Monica stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror, her reflection a study in practiced stillness. The ivory silk of her sleeveless gown flowed over her deep espresso skin like liquid moonlight, the golden undertones of her complexion luminous under the warm vanity lights. Every choice was deliberate. In the world of the Kang Syndicate, Monica Dallaire didn't just dress, she armored herself in elegance. She spent an hour on her hair, the natural 4C texture tamed into a low, sleek chignon that sat at the nape of her neck with architectural precision. Not a single coil was out of place. Her hairline was a smooth, clean sweep held by a whisper of edge control and years of discipline. To the outside world, she was the epitome of exotic grace, a Caribbean jewel set in a Korean crown. But as she fastened the delicate gold pendant necklace Jun-suk had given her 3 anniversaries ago, she saw the slight scar on her inner wrist. It was a relic from a childhood accident in Santo Domingo, a reminder of a life that was loud, messy, and real, everything her current existence was not. She applied a deep rose tint to her full lips, her almond-shaped eyes remaining unreadable even to herself. For 6 years, she had mastered this mask. She knew how to breathe so that her shoulders remained upright but relaxed, how to move with a slow, controlled dignity that never betrayed the exhaustion underneath. She was the invisible architect of the household, the one who navigated Madame Hayrin's icy porcelain stairs and ensured the security team moved like clockwork. Outside the dressing room, she heard the heavy, rhythmic tread of polished leather shoes. The door didn't open, Jun-suk didn't knock. He simply waited. Monica took one last breath, checking the tension in her jaw until it was soft but defined. She was ready to be the trophy, the silent partner, the backdrop to his power. She stepped out into the hallway, her long limbs moving with a poise that felt like a lie. Jun-suk stood there in his charcoal suit, jet black hair slicked back, eyes already scanning his watch. He didn't look at her face, he looked at the ensemble. "The cars are waiting," he said, his deep voice devoid of warmth. Monica nodded, her expression calm and composed, and followed him into the night. A bird in an ivory cage, flying straight toward a silver flash she didn't yet see. Grand ballroom of the Atlanta starlight was a sea of shimmering silk and whispered conspiracies, but to Monica, it felt like a cold, glass exhibit. She moved through the crowd at Jun-suk's side, her hand resting lightly on his charcoal sleeve, a perfect accessory to his formidable presence. Viktor Petrov, a man who smelled of expensive tobacco and old blood, loomed over them, his heavy brow furrowed as he discussed the logistics of the new shipping routes. Jun Suk spoke with a deep, unwavering calm, his eyes never leaving Petrov's face. When the Russian broker finally turned his gaze toward Monica, offering a sharp, predatory smile and a comment on the exquisite taste Jun Suk displayed in his acquisitions, Monica prepared a measured, gracious response. But before she could part her lips, Jun Suk's voice cut through the air, cold and dismissive. He spoke about her as if she were a statue, a piece of high-end real estate he happened to own. He didn't introduce her by name, he simply shifted his shoulders slightly, effectively shuttering her out of the conversation while he laughed at a joke she wasn't meant to hear. The humiliation wasn't a shout, it was a slow, agonizing erasure. As they moved toward the center of the room to meet Lin Xiaoyu, the triad liaison, Jun Suk handed Monica his empty champagne flute without looking back, a silent command for her to dispose of it. She stood there for a heartbeat, the crystal cold against her espresso-brown skin, feeling the weight of a dozen judgmental eyes, including Madame Heyrin's, who watched from a nearby velvet chair with a thin, satisfied smile. Monica's quiet dignity remained intact, her shoulders upright and her face a mask of calm, but inside, the ivory silk felt like a shroud. She was a ghost in a room full of monsters, visible only when she served a purpose. She walked toward the service tray, the glint of the chandeliers blurring in her vision, unaware that the true nightmare was just seconds away. The air in the ballroom grew heavy, the scent of lilies and perfume masking the sharp, metallic tang of the silver blade already being unsheathed in the shadows. The empty glass was a heavy weight in Monica's hand, a symbol of her servitude, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning the room with the practiced vigilance of a woman who had survived 6 years in the mouth of a shark. It was then she saw him, a server whose movements were too jagged, too hungry. He wasn't looking at the tray in his hands, he was looking at the back of Jun Suk's head. As the man's hand dipped into the folds of his white linen apron, the world slowed into a terrifying, crystalline focus. Monica didn't scream. A scream would be too slow, a sound lost in the swell of the orchestral violins and the cacophony of deal-making. Instead, she moved with the instinctive, fluid grace of her ancestors, her long limbs cutting through the heavy air like a scythe. In the span of a heartbeat, the server's hand emerged with a sliver of sharpened steel that caught the overhead light, a jagged tooth of silver aimed directly at the soft junction of Jun Suk's neck. Jun Suk was still laughing, his back turned, his narrow eyes crinkled in a rare display of professional mirth, completely oblivious to the death reaching for him. Monica pivoted, the ivory silk of her gown snapping like a whip. She didn't think about the humiliation of the last hour or the coldness of the man she was about to protect. She only felt the sudden, violent necessity of her own existence. She threw herself into the narrow gap between the blade and her husband, her body a shield of espresso-brown skin and silk. The impact was strangely quiet. There was no thunder, only the sickeningly soft thud of metal meeting resistance. The silver flash found its home in the meat of her shoulder, a cold, biting fire that radiated through her chest. For a microsecond, she looked directly into the assassin's eyes, eyes that were wide with the shock of hitting the wrong target. Then, the silence of the room shattered. The glass flute slipped from Monica's fingers, exploding against the marble floor in a spray of diamonds, and as the heat of her own blood began to bloom across the ivory fabric, Monica finally saw Jun Suk look at her. Truly look at her. But as the world tilted and the floor rose to meet her, all she could think was that the knife was finally more honest than the marriage. The ivory silk was no longer a symbol of elegance. It was a canvas for a horrific, spreading bloom of crimson. The ballroom, once a theater of cold whispers, erupted into a jagged cacophony of shouting security and crashing furniture. Jun Suk caught Monica before her knees could strike the marble, his hands, usually so steady and clinical, fumbling as they met the wet, hot reality of her shoulder. He lowered her to the ground, his tailored charcoal suit instantly ruined by the life leaking out of her. The shock on his face was a visceral thing, shattering his unreadable executive mask. For the first time in their marriage, the crease between his eyebrows wasn't one of irritation, but of pure, unadulterated terror. He pressed his palm against the wound, trying to stem the flow, his light golden beige skin staining dark. Monica, he rasped, his deep voice cracking, the name sounding foreign on his lips after years of calling her only by her title or nothing at all. He looked up, his narrow eyes wild and lethal, screaming for Jae-hyun and the medical team, but the sounds of the room were a dull roar in his ears. Monica looked up at him, her almond-shaped eyes hazy but fixed on his face. She saw the way his jaw trembled, the way he finally, desperately, saw her. Her breathing was shallow, each exhale a ragged struggle against the fire in her chest. She reached up with her good hand, her fingers brushing the sleeve of his jacket, leaving a faint, espresso-and-red smear on the fabric. She wanted to tell him that she wasn't afraid, that the physical pain was a relief compared to the hollow ache of the last 6 years, but the words wouldn't form. Madame Hayrin stood frozen a few feet away, her porcelain face ghostly pale, the judgment finally stripped from her eyes as she watched the anchor of their family bleed out on the floor. Jun-suk pulled Monica closer, tucking her head against his chest, his heart hammering against her ear like a trapped bird. He was the boss of an empire, a man who moved pieces across a board with lethal precision, yet in this moment he was nothing more than a man watching his world collapse into a pool of red-on-white silk. "Stay," he whispered into her hair, a command he had no power to enforce. "Monica, stay." The hospital wing was a tomb of white linen and the rhythmic, synthetic heartbeat of a heart monitor. When Monica finally opened her eyes, the world didn't rush back. It trickled in through a haze of morphine and the antiseptic sting of a life regained. The first thing she saw wasn't the ceiling, but the silhouette of Jun-suk. He was sitting in a rigid plastic chair, his charcoal suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms still faintly stained with the ghost of her blood. He looked older, the sharp angularity of his jaw underscored by a day's growth of stubble, his dark eyes fixed on her with a desperate, burning focus. "Monica," he breathed, the name a jagged prayer as he leaned forward, his hand hovering over the ivory sheets, afraid to touch her. "You're awake. The doctors said the blade missed the artery by millimeters. You saved me." Monica looked at him, her almond-shaped eyes clear but chillingly hollow. She felt the heavy pull of the bandages on her shoulder, a physical weight that anchored her to a reality she had tried to bleed out of. Jun-suk began to speak again, a rush of uncharacteristic words about the security failure, about his brother Damon's suspicious absence, about the specialists he had flown in from Seoul. He spoke of vengeance and protection, of the emerald necklace he had ordered to replace the one ruined by the blood. But Monica simply turned her head toward the window, watching the rain streak against the glass. She didn't offer a nod, a squeeze of the hand, or a single syllable. The silence she had practiced for 6 years as a dutiful wife had finally curdled into something else, a weapon. Every time Jun-suk tried to catch her gaze, she looked through him as if he were the ghost and she was the only one left alive. He was the most powerful man in the city, a king of shadows who could command life and death with a whisper. Yet as he stood by her bed pleading for a sign of recognition, he found himself powerless against the absolute quiet of a woman who had decided she no longer had anything to say to him. She wasn't playing a game, she was simply gone, leaving only a beautiful, espresso-brown shell behind in the sterile white light of the silent wing. The door to the private suite creaked open, admitting a slice of light and the relaxed, slouched confidence of Kang Damon. He entered with a bouquet of lilies that smelled cloyingly of funerals, his light olive beige complexion settled into a mask of brotherly worry. Behind him, the chief bodyguard, Jae-hyun, stood like a stone sentinel, his scanning eyes never leaving the younger brother's silhouette. Damon didn't seem to notice the tension in the room. He moved toward the bed with a slight smirk tucked into the corners of his mouth, his dark brown hair artfully messy. Jun-suk stood abruptly, his athletic frame casting a long shadow over Monica. The air between the brothers turned frigid, a sharp contrast to the sterile warmth of the ward. Damon reached out a hand, clasping Jun-suk's shoulder with a grip that was supposed to be comforting but felt like the coil of a snake. He spoke in a low, textured voice, lamenting the tragedy of the evening and the clumsiness of the security team. He looked down at Monica, at the espresso-brown skin now pale with exhaustion and the thick bandages covering the wound meant for his brother. And for a fraction of a second, his deep-set eyes flared with a suppressed, jagged fury. To anyone else, it looked like grief. To Monica, watching from the periphery of her silence, It was the unmistakable rage of a man whose crown had been snatched away by a woman he considered a decorative non-entity. Damon's relaxed posture was a lie. She could see the way his fingers twitched against his patterned shirt, the way the scar above his left eyebrow pulsed. He hadn't just wanted Jun-suk dead. He had wanted the throne, and his own sister-in-law had become the obstacle he never factored into his equations. "It's a miracle she survived," Damon murmured, his voice smooth as oil. He leaned over the bed, the scent of his casual luxury cologne clashing with the antiseptic. For a moment his gaze locked with Monica's. She didn't blink. She didn't speak. She simply watched the shadow of his betrayal play out in the reflection of his eyes. Jun-suk's jaw tightened, the crease between his eyebrows deepening as he felt the wrongness in the air, though he couldn't yet name it. He dismissed his brother with a sharp, curt nod, and as Damon turned to leave, the smirk returned, fainter, colder, and aimed directly at the door. The hit had failed, but the war for the Kang Empire had only just begun to bleed into the light. If this story has you hooked, hit like and subscribe for more Syndicate Soul stories. Drop a comment with your prediction for what comes next, because we're about to find out. The hospital room grew smaller as Madame Seo Haerin stepped deeper into the circle of light, her presence a cold, sharp blade that sliced through the lingering scent of Damon's cloying lilies. She stood at the foot of the bed, her porcelain face unreadable, her hands folded over her modern navy hanbok with a rigidity that mirrored the hospital's sterile architecture. Jun-suk remained by Monica's side, his shoulders slumped, his executive polish replaced by the raw, jagged edges of a man who realized he was losing his foundation. "You think this empire was built on the strength of men's fists and the sharpness of their lead," Haerin began, her voice a slow, precise rasp that commanded the room. She didn't look at Jun-suk. Her sharp, observant eyes were fixed on Monica's still, silent form. "You see a woman who keeps your home, who wears your jewels, and you think she is a luxury. You think she is the cargo, not the ship." She turned her judging stare toward her son, the silver gray of her hair shimmering under the fluorescent lights. "Your grandfather didn't survive the lean years because he was the most ruthless. He survived because your grandmother was the one who managed the secrets, who fed the loyal and identified the traitors before they could draw breath. She was the ghost in every room, the one who saw the green shimmer in the wine when the men were too blinded by their own pride to look." Jun-suk's jaw tightened, the crease between his eyebrows deepening. He looked at his mother, then back at Monica's espresso-brown complexion, now a haunting shadow of its former luminosity. Haerin moved closer, her pearl earrings catching the light. "A pillar doesn't ask for permission to hold up a roof, Jun-suk. It simply does. But if you spend 6 years chipping away at that pillar because you've forgotten it's there, do not be surprised when the ceiling collapses on your head." She leaned down, her frail but dignified hand hovering briefly near Monica's bandaged shoulder. "She didn't take that knife because she loves the Kang name," the matriarch whispered, her voice chillingly certain. "She took it because she knew that if you fell, the silence she lives in would finally become a tomb. You haven't been protected by a wife, my son. You've been protected by a woman who has forgotten she has a self to save. If she wakes and finds no reason to speak, then the Kang Empire has already fallen." With a final, rigid nod, the matriarch turned and swept from the room, leaving Jun-suk alone with the deafening quiet of the woman who had been his anchor, and the crushing weight of his own sudden visibility. The velvet box sat on the hospital tray like a glistening, green eye, its contents radiating a cold, expensive light. Jun-suk had returned to the room with his executive armor restored, a fresh navy suit, hair perfectly side-parted, and the sharp scent of sandalwood masking the lingering metallic tang of the gala. He didn't speak at first, he simply placed the box within Monica's reach, his deliberate movements betraying a flicker of expectation. Within the silk lining lay an emerald necklace, the stones so deep and clear they looked like frozen drops of the Caribbean Sea she had left behind years ago. The ivory dress was ruined, Jun-suk said, his deep, calm voice filling the sterile space. He stood at the foot of the bed, his posture straight-backed, hands clasped behind him. "And the pendant you wore was common. This is a replacement, a tribute to your loyalty. I've already informed the jeweler that you are to have the matching earrings once you are discharged." He spoke as if he were settling a debt, as if the jagged scar on her shoulder could be stitched closed with gold wire and precious gems. He wanted to fix the glitch in their lives with the only language he truly understood: acquisition. Monica looked at the emeralds, their green shimmer reflecting in her dark brown eyes, but she didn't reach for them. She didn't thank him, nor did she acknowledge the staggering cost of the peace offering. To Jun-suk, the necklace was a shield against his own guilt. To Monica, it was just more weight for the cage. The silence between them stretched, thick and suffocating, until the crease between Jun-suk's eyebrows returned. He waited for the smile, the nod of gratitude, the return of the perfect wife, who moved with quiet dignity at his side. When the nurse came in to check her vitals, Jun-suk took the opportunity to leave, murmuring about a meeting with Viktor Petrov that could no longer wait. He left the room with a brisk, athletic stride, confident that the emeralds would act as a silent bridge back to their old reality. But as the door clicked shut, Monica reached out with her steady, uninjured hand. She didn't put the necklace on. She didn't even touch the stones. She simply slid the velvet box to the very edge of the nightstand, leaving it there among the half-empty water cups and antiseptic wipes. A king's ransom abandoned in the dust, as silent and cold as the man who gave it. The bathroom of the private suite was a sanctuary of cold marble and unforgiving light. For the first time since the gala, Monica stood before a mirror without her mask, the hospital gown pooled at her waist. The steam from the shower had begun to dissipate, leaving her reflection sharp and startlingly honest. She looked first at her inner wrist, tracing the thin, silver line of the scar from her childhood in the Caribbean. That mark was a memory of a girl who had climbed too high and fallen too hard, a girl whose blood had been shed in pursuit of the sun. It was a jagged, humble reminder of a life that belonged entirely to her. Her gaze drifted upward to her shoulder, where the new intrusion lived. The bandages had been removed an hour ago, revealing a dark, puckered ridge of healing flesh. It was a violent punctuation mark on her espresso-brown skin, a map of the moment she had bartered her body for a man who didn't know the color of her soul. This scar was different. It didn't belong to the girl from the islands. It belonged to the Kong Syndicate. It was the physical manifestation of her role as a shield, a mark of ownership that Jun-suk had tried to polish away with emeralds and silk. She touched the ridge of the wound, the sensation dull and tight. The two scars were a decade apart, representing the woman she used to be and the ghost she had become. The light caught the golden undertones of her skin, highlighting the contrast between her natural beauty and the structural damage of her marriage. She realized then that Jun-suk didn't see a scar, he saw a repaired asset. He saw a debt he could settle. But as Monica stared into her own deep brown eyes, she saw the truth. The blade had cut deeper than the muscle. It had severed the last thread of her endurance. She didn't look like a victim, and she didn't look like a hero. She looked like a woman who was finally seeing the cost of her own invisibility. Slowly, with a grace that felt like a silent vow, she reached for her clothes, covering the marks of her past and her present, but knowing that the woman who walked out of this room would never again be the woman who took the knife. The silence that followed Monica back to the Kong estate was not the submissive quiet Jun-suk was accustomed to. It was the heavy, charged stillness of a desert before a storm. As the heavy oak doors of their primary suite closed behind them, Jun-suk began to unbutton his shirt, his mind already moving toward the logistics of the next day's retaliation against the Russian brokers. He expected Monica to take her place at the vanity, to begin the ritual of removing her jewelry and dissolving back into the role of the supportive shadow. Instead, she walked past the expansive, silk-draped bed and began to gather her things. She moved with a slow, agonizing precision, her long limbs fluid despite the bandage pulling at her shoulder. She didn't take much, just the basics, and none of the jewel-toned silks Jun-suk had picked for her. She ignored the emerald necklace still sitting in its velvet box on the dresser. When she reached for a small, leather travel bag, Jun-suk finally turned, the crease between his eyebrows deepening into a sharp canyon. He asked her where she was going, his deep voice vibrating with a mixture of confusion and a sudden, sharp spike of alarm. Monica didn't look at him. She didn't offer the soft, measured explanation he expected. She simply walked toward the door that led to the guest wing, the suite furthest from his own. "I am moving my things," she said, her voice a calm, hollow bell. "The Mafia queen is staying in this room, Jun-suk. You can keep her. She's the one who takes the knives and wears the emeralds to hide the blood." She stepped out into the hallway, leaving him standing in the center of their opulent cage. In the guest room, she stripped away the heavy, minimalist gold jewelry, leaving only the thin, delicate pendant she had owned before she ever met him. She took down her hair, letting the 4C coils breathe, unmasked and wild. She sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, the espresso brown of her skin stark against the plain white linens. For the first time in 6 years, there was no husband to appease, no mother-in-law to perform for, and no empire to anchor. She was alone in the dark, and for Monica, it was the first time she had felt truly visible in years. The following afternoon, the sun bled through the tall windows of the guest wing, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor where Monica sat in quiet contemplation. The silence was broken by a soft, rhythmic tapping, not the heavy, authoritative strike of Jun-suk's heels, but the lighter, hurried step of Damon. He entered without an invitation, sliding into a velvet armchair with a slouch that suggested a shared secret. He looked at Monica, his deep-set eyes tracing the line of her bandaged shoulder with a localized intensity. He didn't offer lilies this time. Instead, he offered a low, vibrating whisper of revolution. He spoke of the humiliation she had endured, his words a toxic weave of sympathy and incitement. He leaned forward, the scar above his eyebrow twitching as he painted a picture of a new order, one where the invisible wife wouldn't just be seen, but would be compensated for her suffering. He assumed that because she had moved into a separate room, she was ready to set the house on fire. He whispered about the Russian brokers, about the accidents that happen to men who are too blinded by their own pride to see their enemies, and finally he spoke of the blade. He claimed he could give her the freedom she was looking for, provided she looked the other way during the next transition of power. Monica watched him, her almond-shaped eyes as still and deep as a mountain lake. She didn't react to his touch when he reached out to pat her hand, but her skin crawled with the cold realization of his treachery. Damon's mistake was fundamental. He thought her Caribbean fire was fueled by a desire for power, when it was actually fueled by a desire for truth. As he spoke, she saw the jagged edges of his ambition, the way he had used her body as a shield for his own hit, only to try and recruit her for the next. She realized then that the silver flash hadn't just been a random act of violence. It was the signature of the man sitting in front of her. The quiet dignity she had maintained for 6 years suddenly felt like a fortress. She didn't reveal her discovery. She simply pulled her hand away, her expression a mask of porcelain calm. "You think I want a new cage, Damon," she said, her voice a soft, measured bell that sent a shiver of warning through the room. "But I am finished with cages altogether." As he left, his smirk faltered for the first time, leaving Monica alone with the weight of a secret that could either burn the Kong Empire to the ground or be the only thing that saves it. If you're enjoying this so far, hit like and subscribe for more Syndicate Soul stories. Let me know in the comments what you think happens next. Alright, let's keep going. The moon hung low over the estate, casting long, skeletal shadows through the windows of the guest suite. Monica was standing by the glass, her silhouette a sharp, elegant line against the silver light, when the door opened. Jun-suk didn't enter with his usual bravado. He stepped into the darkness with a heavy, uncertain tread. He had spent the day hunting the shadows of the Russian brokers, but the coldness radiating from this room had brought him back. He stood a few feet behind her, his golden beige skin appearing gray in the moonlight, his presence a silent demand for the world to return to its axis. "Damon was here," he said, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. "He thinks you are a weak link, Monica. He thinks your silence is a sign that you are ready to break." He moved closer, the scent of expensive tobacco and cold rain clinging to his suit. "I will handle him. I will double the guard. You don't have to worry about the blades anymore." Monica didn't turn around. She watched his reflection in the dark glass, a ghost of the man who had ignored her for 6 years. "You still don't see it, do you?" she asked, her voice a soft, measured bell that cut through his authority. She finally turned, her almond-shaped eyes wide and hauntingly clear. "You're looking for assassins in the garden and traitors in the boardroom, but you're missing the architect of this entire tragedy." Jun-suk's jaw tightened, the crease between his eyebrows deepening into a jagged line. "Damon is the one who hired the blade. He is the enemy." "No," Monica whispered, stepping into his space until she could feel the frantic heat of his heart against the cool ivory of her skin. She looked up at him, the espresso brown of her face luminous in the dark. Damon only took advantage of the vacuum you created. For 6 years, you stripped me of my name, my voice, and my worth. You made me so invisible that even a killer thought I was just part of the scenery. She reached out, her fingers brushing the charcoal fabric of his lapel. You were the one who sharpened the knife, Junsk. He just held it. The silence that followed was absolute. Jun-suk recoiled as if she had struck him, the realization of his own hand in her destruction finally breaking through his iron mask. He stood in the dark, a mafia boss with no territory left to claim but the wreckage of his own marriage. The shift in Jun-suk was not a sudden explosion of noise, but a terrifying, deepening frost. He didn't call for a boardroom meeting or an official tribunal. He moved through the estate with the silent, lethal grace of a man who had finally found something worth more than his crown. He found Dae-min in the private lounge, reclining with a glass of vintage scotch, his relaxed posture radiating the smug confidence of a man who thought his brother was still blinded by grief. When Jun-suk entered, the air in the room seemed to vanish. There was no smirk on the younger brother's face this time, only a sudden, jagged realization as he looked into Jun-suk's eyes and saw not the mafia boss, but a husband who had finally been forced to see. Jae-hyun stood at the door, a square-jawed shadow that ensured no one would interrupt. Jun-suk didn't raise his voice. He didn't offer a lecture on loyalty or the sanctity of the syndicate. He simply closed the distance between them, his athletic frame casting a shadow that swallowed Dae-min whole. When he spoke, his voice was a deep, gravelly vibration that felt like the earth cracking open. He told Dae-min that the empire could be rebuilt and the Russian brokers could be bartered with, but the blood on Monica's ivory silk was a debt that could only be paid in exile. He systematically stripped his brother of his rank, his access, and his name, dismantling Dae-min's influence with a cold, surgical precision that left the younger man trembling. Dae-min tried to protest, to bring up the business and the instability his removal would cause, but Jun-suk silenced him with a single, crushing grip on his collar. For the first time, the Iron Boss wasn't protecting a territory or a profit margin. He was purging the rot that had dared to touch the woman in the guest wing. He forced Dae-min into the waiting car, a ghost sent into the night, stripped of everything he had tried to steal. As the taillights disappeared, Jun-suk stood on the driveway, the light golden beige of his skin pale under the moon. He didn't feel the triumph of a victor. He felt only the hollow ache of the years he had wasted, and the desperate, urgent need to return to the woman whose silence was now the only thing he cared to break. In the wake of the purge, the estate settled into a heavy, expectant quiet, but Jun-suk did not return to his office. Instead, he found himself in the guest wing, not as a king demanding entry, but as a student standing before a closed book. He began to look, truly look, at the items Monica had brought into this small, reclaimed space. On the nightstand sat a worn, dual-language prayer book and a small wooden mortar and pestle that smelled faintly of garlic and dried spices, remnants of a life he had dismissed as a colorful footnote to his own. He spent the evening listening to the soft, rhythmic cadences of her voice when she spoke to her mother on the phone, the fluid transition between French Creole and Spanish that he had once considered a mere distraction. He realized with a stinging clarity that he had married a woman of 2 islands, a daughter of revolution and resilience, yet he had tried to force her into a singular, silent mold of his own making. He began to ask questions that had no business in a mafia ledger. He asked about the meaning of the gold pendant, learning it was a gift from her grandmother in Santo Domingo, meant to protect those who navigate deep waters. He listened as she spoke of the heat of Port-au-Prince and the vibrant, defiant joy of the Dominican hills, a warmth that stood in stark contrast to the light golden beige coldness of the world he had trapped her in. Jun-suk sat in the chair across from her, his athletic frame feeling cumbersome in the presence of her quiet dignity. He didn't offer diamonds this time. Instead, he offered his attention, a currency he had hoarded for 38 years. He watched the way her 4C hair coiled, unashamed and free, and how her espresso-brown skin seemed to catch the light differently when she spoke of her own history rather than his. He was learning a new language, not of power or intimidation, but of the woman he had lived beside for 6 years without ever meeting. The mafia boss was receding, replaced by a man realizing that the most complex territory he had ever tried to conquer was the heart of the woman who had already saved his life. Through the stories of her heritage, The 18-inch gap between them began to feel, for the first time, like a distance that could actually be crossed. The rain-slicked pavement outside the Meridian Ballroom reflected 1,000 city lights, but the atmosphere inside was a different kind of brilliance. It was the first major gathering of the families since the night the ivory silk was stained red, and a heavy, expectant hush fell over the foyer as the Kong convoy arrived. Jun Suk stepped out of the black sedan, his posture as straight and athletic as ever, but there was a fundamental shift in the way he occupied the space. Instead of leading the way with a cold, predatory stride, he turned back to the car and waited. Monica emerged, moving with a fluid, slow-burning confidence that required no mask. She wore a sleeveless dress of deep emerald green, a color she had chosen herself, not to match a jewelry box, but to celebrate the vibrant warmth of her own skin. The 4C texture of her hair was styled into a sculpted, regal crown that accentuated the soft but defined jawline and the quiet dignity of her expression. As they walked toward the entrance, the security team, led by a vigilant Jae-hyun, fell into a tight formation. But the most striking change was Jun Suk. He did not walk 2 steps ahead. He stood half a step behind her, his hand resting not on her arm as a leash, but as a silent anchor of support. When they entered the ballroom, the whispers died down. Viktor Petrov and the other brokers looked on, their faces masks of calculating surprise. In the past, Monica would have been the beautiful backdrop to Jun Suk's negotiations. Tonight, when a rival approached to offer a greeting, Jun Suk didn't cut her off. He remained in her shadow, deferred to her voice, and watched with a rare, unreadable pride as she navigated the room with the measured, Caribbean grace he had finally learned to value. The Mafia boss was still there, but he was no longer a man who needed to erase his wife to feel powerful. The scar on her shoulder was hidden beneath the emerald fabric, and the one on her wrist was visible as she reached for a glass of water, refusing the wine. They stood together, a partnership of espresso brown and light golden beige, no longer defined by invisibility or blades. As the cameras flashed, Monica didn't look for her reflection in the glass. She looked straight ahead, visible at last, not because she had taken a knife, but because she had finally taken her place. The story of Monica and Jun Suk offers a profound lesson on the power of visibility and the danger of emotional neglect. The primary moral is that no empire, whether financial or criminal, is worth the destruction of the people who sustain it. For years, Monica was the invisible pillar, the one who maintained the peace and managed the chaos, yet she was treated as an acquisition rather than a partner. The story teaches us that true strength isn't found in a cold, unreadable exterior, but in the ability to cherish and protect the loyalty of those closest to us. When we stop seeing our loved ones, we create a vacuum that invitingly harbors betrayal and despair. Furthermore, it reminds us that our worth is not defined by how much we can endure in silence. Monica's transformation shows that setting boundaries and demanding respect is not an act of betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. A relationship without mutual recognition is merely a cage, no matter how much silk and emeralds are used to decorate it. Thank you so much for watching this story until the very end. If Monica's journey moved you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into stories of power, sacrifice, and redemption. See you in the next one.